Okay, so let's continue. What I would like to do now is to create a new folder here. So this is going to hold my users. This is where I would like to group every operation that relates to the user. And maybe what I can actually already do would be to come in here, maybe take these two actually and move them into this users. And then I'll still have to move a couple of things around because now we get some errors, but that's also totally fine. And yes, first thing I would want to do would be to get rid of this. And so this is fine. And now what I can do is I come into here and then now I create a file. This will be my mod rs. And then from here now I would have my pub mod gets user. And maybe I'd first bring this into scope so we can have IntelliSense. So let's say pub mod users. Okay, so now let's come back in here. So we have get users. Now I would like to add pub mod get users. So already had user. And now what we can simply do would be to update this one here. And so I can maybe make this get user. Yes. And now maybe I remove this one. Do I want to do it like this? And so this would be get user dot get user. And of course I would maybe group this together actually. So this would be get user and this would be get users. So pretty straightforward like this. And this should now be fine again. So what I'll simply do is just move things around a little bit so we can actually now focus in here. So in here, I would like to create a couple files. So one would be to add user.rs. One would be to, let's say, delete user.rs. And what else did we implement actually? So we had insert, get, delete, get all. And I think that's pretty much what we have in here. So now I need to bring this all into focus. So pub mod, I need my add user and pub mod, I need my delete user. Now everything should be fine. So what I would like to do now is to hook up all of this. So let's go to get user. And so we don't have here. Now we are simply still getting this from our path. What are we getting actually? Our path param just contains name, ID, and email. So that's also okay. Let's go to get users. Um, so our get users already has access to our app state. So let's do, maybe the first thing I would like to do is actually to modify our app state so it contains exactly what we need. And I'm just gonna get rid of to-dos for now because we'll come back to this. Would not be using that for now, but maybe we'll use it sometime along down the tutorial. But anyways, what I would like to do here now is if you look over here, our app state, let's go to where we defined it. Now it's simply just a string, which is wrapped within a mutex that we are just passing around. And of course, this does not really help us. We actually don't need this. So now I'm just going to remove this because we really don't need it. So what we need to have in here would be our connection pool. So this would be our PG pool. And now I can I can now come back in here to update our state more or less. And again, remember what we did over here. We have our connection string. So I'm just probably going to cut it, bring it up here. And now we have our connection string. So now what we need to do more or less would just be to update our app state. And again, we don't need this anymore. Now we only need to create our pool. So to create our pool, of course, this is quite pretty straightforward. So maybe up here, I would say let's pool. This pool would be, of course, we'll get this from our PG pool options. So let's say PG pool options. it has a default implemented. That's why it's also have this .new, and again it's implemented using the builder pattern. So now we can do things like max connections. Maybe I would say like 5. We want to have 5 maximum connections. And now I say that connects, and then I provide a string. Now this would be our connection string. And again, of course, we need to await because this is an async process. So we need to await. And then, of course, we need to then handle the error that comes afterwards. So for now, I'm just going to say expect. So here we can simply say code not establish a connection. If I can type to the database. So if we get an error, we simply say we could not connect to the database. That's just it. That's all I want us to have for now. Okay, so now we have our connection pool, which is of course over here. Maybe I just bring this into one line so we can easily read the code. So we have our we got our, maybe I make this a little bit more intuitive. So I say con string. So this will be our connection string, or maybe let's also be as explicit as possible. So db con string. So we pass our connection string to our PG options, which of course helps us to establish a connection to our database. And then once we have our pool, we'll now put this into a state. And then if we have this in the state, we'll add this, of course, here as an app data. And then we have this accessible to all our endpoints, more or less. But now we have some errors, like in login, for example, which is also okay. But we don't need this anymore. So I'm just going to remove all of this. This is no longer needed here. So I remove everything that has to do with app data for now. And of course, let's go to users. It seems we also have one here. Again, I'm going to remove this, and this should be fine for now. Let's go back to main. We have an error. Of course, we don't need this log anymore because again, it doesn't even make sense for us to log our connection string because we want this to be as secure as possible. Anyway, so now what we can simply do is let's go to some of the examples we had initially. Let's say auth logout. Which one was it? Not auth, maybe public is this one. And I'm just going to copy this because again this has our app states, and I can go to users and maybe go to add users, or let's say this one first. Maybe let me just copy this. Let's go to add users and put it in here. So this would be our add user, and again it's going to be a post. It's going to be add slash users, and maybe I simply say like, I don't know, slash add, like this. And actually we don't need any query params anymore. So what we need here would be let's come back to get users. I think we actually use this somewhere. So you already had this in here, so I'm just going to copy this part because this would like to provide some request more or less. And then again, I change this import to post. And now again, I remove this path. We don't need this anymore. And I can call this user. And this would be our user model. And so now we have access to our user model. And what is the error we have? Let me save and see if this goes away. Okay, of course it does goes away. So now I can remove all of this. We don't need this anymore. Maybe I'll just remove all of this because we don't need this anymore for now. Now what we really need to do would be to actually just make a request to our database and use what we've created. So let me put this on the side here so you will see exactly what we're doing. So let's go to DB, and now you see we have our module implemented here. So now what I can simply do is try to use this in here because again, that's the only way this would make sense for us. Otherwise, all we've been doing would be in vain actually. So let me save that a bit so this error goes away. I don't like to see it. Anyway, so now let's try to use this to actually do an insert into our database. So now I can simply say, let's see if IntelliSense is going to help. So let's say users.insert this one. And so we actually don't use this. So I'm going to get rid of it for now, if we don't really need it. And so now here I need to pass a user and of course a pool. So this pool would come from our app data. So I can simply say app data.pool. And why do we have an error? So expected destruct and found this. I think we can simply do user.o like this, and then this should be fine. And now, of course, if you remember, we actually had this scenario whereby this is, of course, returning. Again, we need to await this anyways. So let's say dot await. And but apart from that, we get two things back. Actually, we get an enum, which could be or like query result, or of course an error. But again, what we can do, maybe now I can collapse this part because we don't need it anymore. We have what we want. So what we can do again is more or less reuse all we've done in the past. So here we can actually decide to return like an error. In this case, it's going to be our own custom error, or we can actually return like like a response if everything goes well. Okay, so let's look. We did this somewhere in the past. So let's look to find. So, and that's exactly what we have here. So I'm just going to copy this and come back to our add user. And now I replace our implementation here with this. So now what this means actually is that, okay, phew. So let's say errors.http error means now we have the option to, of course, return exactly either of two things. So if everything goes well, of course, it will be an okay. Otherwise, would return an error to the user. That's really the point. And because again, I don't want to just dump all of this on you, and that's why I want us to do this incrementally, and then you can actually see how all of this comes to place and why we have implemented them in the first place. That's really the idea. I don't want to dump things on you. That's really not the idea. You would probably not learn the idea behind the whole setup. So now what we can simply do is to match this response. And then we decide what we want to do. So we have our OK on. So if everything goes well, then I want to return this part. And of course, this should be wrapped anyways. Again, I remove these parts. But it's gonna complain sooner or later. So, but if we get an error, now this is where we return our error. But let me just dump this here first, and because I know that we would get an error here anyways. So, but to fix this is again pretty straightforward. We need to wrap this within an OK. Okay, and that should be fine. And then for the second part, we need to wrap this again in an error. Okay, so now let's clean this up. So we would wrap this, of course, this would be our okay if everything goes well, and then this part would be, of course, our maybe I just remove all of this, so we'll have our error and here would be our errors, the HTTP error, and of course this was an enum. So for now, let me just say internal server error, and of course we don't need this colon anymore. And that's actually fine. So maybe here we can actually say, again, we don't even need this format anymore. So I'm just going to remove this and maybe say you have successfully inserted the user, something like this. And that's actually more or less all the code would need to insert a user. But again, the point here is actually to separate our concerns more or less. We don't want to have the whole code like bundled up in the same file where we should have actually have distribution of concerns. So this function, if you look here, is actually doing what it said here it's gonna do. So it's not supposed to actually know the how this is actually being inserted into the database. It should only care about like just doing this. It has nothing to do with the database. So it just calls this function to insert, and then again it's quite generic because we don't actually have anything hard coded anyways. So again, it's pretty straightforward. Either get a response back, of course, or we get an error, and in this case the error is our custom error. And if everything goes well, we are returning a string to the user. Of course, we also have the option to even return a JSON if we want, and we can also change that if we want. Okay, so let's say we want to return a JSON to the user, and I'm just gonna go back in here. Where was it? No, not more auth. It should actually be in users. So yeah, it's still here. So instead of this string that we actually returning here, let's say we wanted to return a JSON, all we need to do is let's first take a look to our user model. So we have serialize implemented, which also means we already have shared installed, which is also what you can see over here. And of course, we have the required traits, features more or less, sorry, implemented. So then for us to return this to the user is actually pretty straightforward. What we can do is maybe now we remove these parts and we simply say web JSON, and this JSON we simply wrap again with this. We simply wrap this with a struct that of course that has implemented serialize. In this case, I'm just going to return the user that we are getting back to the user this way. um and that's actually all we have to do. Maybe the next thing we might want to do is to let's go to where we actually add in the user. Let's go to this. So we're getting an error here. um mhm. Okay, maybe this is not. Let's handle. So I just thought of two things actually. So we'll handle it individually. That's totally fine. So here for the ID, again, I don't think it makes sense that we ask the user to actually supply us with this ID. It just does not make sense. So I think it's cool if we can more or less add this ID ourselves, and so that the user doesn't have to do this themselves. That's really what I thought. And so what we can actually do here is maybe to, of course, modify the ID over here, let's say using UUID, and then we simply just pass that in here. And then that way it will make it a lot easier for us to, of course, modify this ID the way we would want to. So to do that, I would like to add UUID. So I need UUID and I need to provide some information. So I have version. I would go for version 1.2, so 1.2, and features. I would need two things. So one will be certain, which I already have over there, and then the next one, of course, will be for v4, and that's what we need for UUID. And now we can go back in here, so we can actually modify this payload. So we can actually say something like user.0.id, and this is equal to some ID, which we are going to, of course, create in here to modify our request. But let's give this a couple of minutes or seconds to install the dependencies we need, and then we can continue. Okay, so we have installed our package. So now I can actually just change this part to say UUID. And I need UUID. And then of course I need a version 4, so I can simply say new v4. And again, this needs to be a string, so I can simply say to string. And maybe before I do this, I can say let id equal to this, because I want to parameterize this. So now I can say user.0.id is equal to id. And now Consider changing this to be mutable. Oh, of course. Oof, okay. Let's make this mutable. So because we would like to um hmm, oh no, I don't really want to do all of this in here. So what I can actually do is what I can actually do is to let's go to our inserts and maybe let's modify this to take an ID. That's okay. That's okay. I remove this part. And so here I simply pass the ID, which we are already, of course, getting from here. So now we are actually passing this ID in here. So now what I can also do again would be just to pass this ID over here. And then we don't need to do this anymore. Now we can maybe create our own JSON actually, and we can maybe tell the user, for example, the user with this ID has been created, something like that. That's actually one way we can do it. But just as simple as that. Anyways, what I can actually do to keep this part so simple for now, so we can focus on other things, we simply just to copy this part, come back in here, and I will remove this whole thing and then paste this one in. And of course, now I can get rid of all of this. I really don't need it. I only need the ID, which we created up there. And we can say something like the user with the ID has been successfully created. Something like this. And I can simply just throw in this ID. It's actually totally fine. And of course, one thing I can already do is to go back to this function. I can actually just change this to a string this way. So this should be fine. Then I can come back in here and pass this by reference, and then we should be good. So now this is completely fixed. If we wanted to use the add user endpoint, of course, you can see here it's actually pretty neatly done. And anyways, again, what we can do more or less for this would be, let's say for get user, we already have like some base work done. So all I need to do now is to copy this first part, which of course contains our app state. I can come back to get user, provide this in here. And then we can get the ID of the user actually from our path param. So I'm probably just going to change this from our query param to a path param. And we already did something like this in the past. And this, if you look over here, this is already what we did. So I'm just going to copy this again, come back in to get user, which is this one, and then I replace this with this. So this would be just a string. And so we have our app state. So of course I can change this to app state. So we have it imported. And now what we simply need to do again would be exactly what we did over here. So we match the deletion. So I can simply do users delete, and then I provide an ID. We already have the ID, and then the state, the pool we can get from our app data, appdata.pool, like this. And yes, of course, I can maybe just change this to ID, and then this should be fine. And now we can actually just match. We have an error here. Okay, let's do it to string as you suggested. And now this, I can get rid of this because we don't need this anymore. If I hover over delete, again, you see we get two things back. We either get an error or of course like a query result. So we can again match this. Again, I can already just copy what we had in here, this part at least, because again, we need to await this. So I can come back in here and delete this, await, or come on, I copy it and wait twice. And now I can actually match match this like this. And so in the OK part, I would, again, we can decide what we want to return here, but we don't have this imported HTTP response. And we can actually have something like this. I'm going to get rid of this part because it's no longer needed. And that's actually all we need. So now I can again get rid of this one because I just need to clean out all unused imports. And again, get user, that's all the code we actually need to implement get user. And again, we can do the same for get users. It's also pretty straightforward. And again, for delete user. So maybe what I would do is just go ahead and make the implementations, and then I can, just to speed things up a little bit, and then we can conclude, of course, this series. Because if you look over here, we've actually just more or less covered all of this in here. So anyways, like I said, I'll pause the video, add the two implementations for both delete user and get users, and then we can conclude these parts. Okay, I've gone ahead to make all the implementations we require for all the endpoints. So if you look now, we have like add user, delete user, get user, and of course get users. These are all implemented right now. And then of course I made a little some changes to the endpoint. For example, initially we had the ID like this, but of course I made a mistake because that would be how you would do this, for example, in Go. So but of course I've gone ahead to correct those mistakes. And then again, I've gone to create our SQL schema here, as you can see. So we still have our to-dos table, and of course we now have, of course, our users table. And initially I did this drop if it exists, but now I just took this out because we don't need this anymore, and now I just have everything we need in here. So we simply, so that's of course when we have hot reload, and then this should not every time delete our database and then create a new one for us. And maybe I also do the same here. So I say create table, if not exists. I'll do the same for to-dos. But anyways, that's all the changes I made. And of course, to execute those queries, the only thing again I did was again to come to our main file and then add this singular line over here. So it's just using the pool that we already instantiated before to simply execute the content of this SQL schema. And that's really all the changes I made. And now if I go back to I've also come in here to create all the endpoints that we just talked about, and then of course added some examples, some simple ones. Again, I've also provided the connection, the correct connection string to my Postgres database and shuttle RS. And that's also why I'm not showing that, because I don't want the secrets to be public. Anyway, so everything is set, and here I can come here and create another user. I can call this user Tony 2018, something like this, and then I create this user, and then I get our message. Of course, this has been successfully created, and then I can try to get this user again by replacing this ID here and fetching the user, and then of course we have the user that we just created. And then I created one before, so now we can also do like get all users, and then we see all what we've created. And again, finally we can again remove this by adding this in here to delete, and then this should of course delete. If we try to get all users again, now we should get an empty list. Anyways, guys, that was a quick one. I tried to wrap everything up, but it also seems our videos keeps getting longer and longer. But anyways, let's wrap this. Let's draw the curtain here. In the next series, I would take like 5-10 minutes to do like a quick rundown one more time, as to like what we did in the finishing touches to end, to wrap up like what we did with database, and then we can proceed for what we have next in our series. Anyways, guys, that will be all. Thank you for being part of this journey, and of course, again, if you're new, don't be shy, go ahead and subscribe, and we promise you to, of course, keep you educated on informative content. Anyways, that will be all, guys, for now, and until next time, have a lovely evening and see you soon. Bye bye.